My perfect Christian boyfriend was sleeping with my best friend for years behind my back, so I ruined their lives. So throughout the senior year of high school, he had a very close-knit friend group. It consisted of my boyfriend of 3 years, Kyle, my best friend since middle school, Sarah, myself, and a recent inclusion into the friend group, Brad, who was a bit of white knight. My boyfriend Kyle belonged to a Christian family. Not the nice charity-giving, actually Christians, but rather the homophobic, slur-slinging, will kick a homeless guy in the face and then sit in church like a saint Christians. They always went to church every Wednesday and Friday, and while they invited me, I never went due to being agnostic, a closeted bi woman, and almost physically sick from their hypocrisy. They never really liked me because of this. They also were entitled. It wasn't evident until they got into trouble. You see, they helped organize the church's funding, which put them pretty high on the pecking order. The church, while not the centerpiece of our part of town, still claimed a lot of the district's authority figures as patrons. It was the sort of unofficial institution that sneaks its way into politics without ever being directly involved. So whenever they got pulled over or issued a parking ticket, they'd drop a couple names and dodge the whole thing. Kyle himself was decent. I'd known him since elementary school. He was usually nice, and he was hot, so I tolerated his idiotic and oftentimes narcissistic behavior, as his family treated him like God's gift to earth. But it was his sister Charlie who redeemed the whole family. She was a year younger than Kyle and I, and was the only genuine Christian in the group. However, she also had an impish streak in her that led to some fun hijinks. You could always tell she'd had a devilish epiphany with this little half smile she'd make. We'd often hang out and she was a blast to be around. We were very close, and she often confided in me about stuff she couldn't tell her family. To me, a great friend. To them, the perfect little Christian daughter. My best friend Sarah was a really good friend who had helped me through the death of my mom. I wasn't diagnosed with depression or anything major, but I loved my mama to pieces and it shattered me. Her and Kyle were always there for me, and she was the one who pushed me to ask him out. I trusted her about as much as any teenager could. One fateful Tuesday, Kyle, Sarah, myself and some other mutual friends headed downtown to get food, skate and generally do stereotypical annoying teenage stuff. Getting bored of our current activities, I asked Kyle if he wanted to race on our boards to the end of the street. He accepted in about 30 seconds, and a loose flagstone later I ended up planting my face into the sidewalk and fracturing my arm. I tried to shake it off, but no one else was having it, considering I was walking like a newborn deer and my arm was beginning to swell. We ended up making a visit to the ER where they confirmed that yes, I did have a fractured arm, and a concussion to boot. The concussion was my idiot tax. It wasn't too big a deal as far as accidents go, but considering my sorry state, they wanted me to stick around so they could do a few more tests, brace my arm, and generally just ensure that I was healthy enough to return to my idiocy. Thankfully, Kyle and Sarah had offered to stay with me, because apparently their parents didn't care, and we were already ditching, so school the following day wasn't a big issue. I ended up spending the night in the hospital and went home the following day with the usual concussion orders. Effectively, I was to become a carrot, word to Beetlejuice, for 10 days. Wanting to get back to my recently attained freedom, I complied, meaning I spent about 7 days sleeping and eating. I only picked up my phone after the doctor cleared me, to which I found an unexpected message. My friend Brad had gotten my number from Kyle, and sent me a link to a private data storing account and a password. Being intrigued by this sudden plot hook in my boring life, I followed it to find literal gigabytes of pictures, all showing Kyle and Sarah in compromising positions and captions hollering things that were definitely not beneficial to their relationship with the Lord. I'm talking about everything from individual explicit pics taken from the chat of snaps to full-on money shots and everything in between. It looked like an amateur adult films album. The most recent of which was dated to, as you probably guessed, that Tuesday evening. Brad explained that Kyle had this whole thing where he'd upload videos of him and Sarah doing it for his close circle to rub one out too. I personally would have simply used the hub like a normal human, but Kyle had always been a little self-infatuated, so I wasn't too surprised at this narcissist-level move. Brad had apparently just been included and was sickened by the whole thing. For context, in our 3 years of dating, the furthest Kyle and I had gone was me giving him brain after a football game that January. He spewed bullcrap about saving it for marriage while sleeping with my best friend. I was shattered. The two people I had placed my unconditional trust in had, without my knowing, been taking turns literally pounding that trust away, all the while being fully aware of their importance in my life. I confronted Kyle about this when we next hung out at his place, and he denied everything at first. Said I was being paranoid. When I showed him the evidence, he involved his parents, who started claiming I photoshopped the photos and videos, and threatened that they would report me for this. Knowing the police would prove me right, but not wanting to tank Brad for possession, I dropped it and left. I thought we'd broken up, but apparently his parents insisted we stay together until after graduation to save face with his extended family. Apparently they knew deep down he was guilty, but the usual EP tendencies flared up. Not wanting to make waves yet, I reluctantly complied, and began regressing into my earlier negative mental spaces. But then, I figured that I wanted revenge. Text. My perfect Christian boyfriend was sleeping with my best friend for years behind my back, so I ruined their lives. After finding out that my boyfriend Kyle had been screwing my best friend Sarah for years but being forced to stay in the relationship by his narcissistic and religious parents, I knew I wanted revenge, and I wanted it to be sweet. The funny thing about religious families is that they are just as prone to producing LGBT children as non-religious ones. Kyle had avoided the sickness as they called it. Kyle's 1 year younger sister Charlie hadn't. Not 1 week after our argument, I was at Kyle's house, helping him keep up the act. We hardly interacted, so I turned to Charlie, who I was goof friends with, for companionship. This typically happened when Kyle and I would get into fights, as Charlie's chill demeanor and deep concern often led me to confide in her, sometimes with things I didn't even share with Sarah. This being the biggest argument of our relationship, was no different. While we were chilling in her room, she started to get really antsy. Her normal bubbly demeanor was gone. Contrary to your typical lesbian, I didn't have a strong gaydar, so I assumed she'd learned of Kyle's infidelity. Well, yes, but actually no. I asked her what was wrong and she said she had a secret to spill. I wasn't really in the mood for drama or comforting, but it being Charlie, I let her go. In what has yet to be the second biggest surprise of my life, she told me about how she'd been in the closet for years, and apparently for a long time she'd been trying to get closer to me because I was the only person she truly felt comfortable around. Her family was almost stereotypically homophobic and really only approved of her church friends. She was jealous of Kyle and our relationship, but thinking I was straight and not wanting to rock the boat, she resigned herself to her angsty teenage heartache. That was until the HMS relationship struck an infidelity iceberg. And she figured she could finally shoot her shot. Now, given any other circumstance, I would have said hell no. We'd known each other for over a decade, and I'd been dating her brother for 3 years. It would have been scummy, and Charlie was practically a sister to me at this point. But then the blood started rushing and the lizard brain started screaming for payback. I'll spare the details for her privacy, but one woohoo later, her and I were enjoying the afterglow when her gears really started turning, and not long after Charlie was screaming my name. I felt like crap after. I knew what I'd done was wrong, but given my current situation I frankly didn't care about that. I more so felt bad for Charlie. At the time, my feelings were twisted and painful, and I thought I didn't really like her that way, so I thought I'd just one and done the only non-family member who I still trusted. She caught on to the vibe I was giving off and ended up talking me out of some bad thoughts while we got dressed and said our goodbyes. We ended up continuing the relationship after that. For her, she finally got to be with her longtime crush, and I got an escape. When the day of graduation came and went, we maintained the charade until both our families, as well as their church group, went over to their place for a massive dinner celebration and commemorative slideshow. Now I'd known about this event since the fall, and hadn't thought too much of it until the incident. During our fling, Charlie had been pushing me out of my slump and towards thoughts of vengeance. Apparently, her parents had been spreading rumors to their church group that I had been cheating on Kyle, and they were saying that after the dinner he was going to dump me. In front of an entire crowd that included my family. I didn't really care about myself, but my dad had gotten a lot of flack for remarrying after mom died. Some of it even came from me, but having the perspective of age and distance, I got over it. I was not about to have him publicly embarrassed by some jerks who thought they blessed the ground they walked on. Before it was just petty high school drama. But this was no joke. My dad worked for the district rep's office. The district rep grew up at that church. It was part of his one of the people persona. A few choice words for my dad's job would be history. Guess Kyle's parents in their malignancy never thought that part through. Or maybe they did and I'm giving them too much credit. Either way, this was now personal. So Charlie, being her impish self, began scheming. She was loved by the church group, so it was easy for her to get the role of prepping the slideshow. She even gave a whole speech about how she couldn't wait to finally give her brother and his friends the recognition they deserved. She then began compiling the videos and photos from the Circle Jerk account Kyle had made, where he had documented photos and videos of Im and Sarah sleeping together, alongside screenshots of their conversations in a group chat they had, and integrated them into a slideshow. It was structured so that a slide would pop up with a bunch of pictures of the boy in question alongside their favorite Bible quote. Then the next few slides would include the screenshots of their respective conversations and whatever pictures they had listed as their favorites. Altogether, this slideshow took Charlie days to compile, but not once did she complain or ask for a break. She was on a mission, and alongside being hot in its weird way, it was also shifting my perspective on our relationship. So the night comes and we're all sitting around the table, making small talk and putting on our best fake smiles. Several church families are giving me smug "you're gonna get what's coming to you" looks, but I shrugged them off and stuck with my family for most of the night. Charlie and I avoided each other to ensure no one got suspicious. Finally, the moment of truth came. Everyone was called into the backyard where they had rows of chairs set up in front of a massive projector. Charlie portrayed her best innocent little sister act before starting the soundtrack. The slides began to roll, and people began to gasp and yell in tune to Good Old Days by Macklemore. Seeing the looks on Kyle and his family's faces as they realized what was happening was priceless. In turn, each boy was brought on screen and put on blast, and each time everyone was too busy recovering from the whiplash to stop it. The few that did try to grab Charlie's laptop, but she quickly scooped it up and ran into the house, locking herself in a bathroom. The projector was wireless. No one thought to turn off the projector. Idiots. Finally, After almost 5 minutes of Bible quotes and explicit screenshots of Kyle and Sarah texting each other discussing what they were doing, the boy of the hour was put on screen and the photos and videos of them were shared on the projector. Kyle's quote, Hebrews 13:4 Give honor to marriage, and remain faithful to one another in marriage. God will surely judge people who are immoral and those who commit adultery. It was intended to create the setup for my humiliation. Oh, how the turntables. A handful of videos showed his exploits, alongside screenshots of the rows of content he had made, with text fading back years implying the length of his fling. It hurt to watch, but I found my solace in the sweet nectar of vengeance laid before my eyes. Finally came the last slide, a blank white page with a single audio file link. Even I was confused at this part, seeing as audio wasn't included in our plans. Charlie crept back outside and clicked play, and Kyle's parents' voices came screaming through the speakers. Apparently, Charlie had recorded their entire humiliation plan in detail, and had added it to the slideshow as evidence of my impending setup. The girl had covered all bases, and when the show ended, she stood next to the projector beaming. That devilish half-grin. It took a few seconds for anything to happen. Kyle and his family beat a hasty retreat to the house, but the party being at their place they had nowhere to go. Several church members conveyed their disgust at Charlie, Kyle, and the boys in equal measure for the event. She ignored them, called out to her parents, and waited for them to peek their heads out. When they did, she quickly planted a massive kiss on my cheek and pronounced herself as gay. Needless to say, that didn't go down well. My parents and I left in a hurry, and Charlie, now in deep trouble, came with us. The aftermath was quite a show as well. My perfect Christian boyfriend was sleeping with my best friend for years behind my back, so I ruined their lives. So the aftermath of my ex-boyfriend Kyle's sister ruining the image of his perfect family was glorious. So, the sister Charlie and I have been dating since. As you probably guessed, her family cut ties with her immediately, so she ended up crashing at my place. My stepmom wasn't too pleased with how she'd gone about the revenge, but my dad thought it was hilarious. He collected his $20 from my stepmom. They'd had a bet over when I'd come out, apparently, and argued on our behalf for Charlie to stay. After all, they had an interesting first impression, and there was no risk of pregnancy. To top it off, it was the perfect way for them to spite Kyle's family after they trashed my reputation and tried to make me an outcast. He caught some jokes and snide remarks at work for the next few weeks, but given the circumstances and the fact I was a teenage daughter, he got off. No harm. As for Kyle? Well, his family got barred from their church after his collection came to light, which caused them to fall from local grace. They lost the ear of local officials, and the various name drops they'd been using to avoid various fines and penalties caught up to them. Last I heard from Sarah, they had moved to the next state over and Kyle was living in his parents' basement, squeaking by at a community college. Oh yeah, his dad took his own life too. Sarah and I made up eventually. It took a lot of apologizing and no small amount of groveling on her part, but not wanting to resent her for the rest of my life, I got over myself and allowed her back in. We're not as close as we used to be, but that trust is slowly growing back. Let's just hope she keeps her stuff in her pants this time. Charlie and I lived together until I went off to college, where we've been long distance since. She managed to get into a school 2 hours away, so we often spend weekends at each. Others' dorms or somewhere in between, doing our typical hedonistic thing. It's taken me some time to fully recover. As cathartic as our revenge felt, it did little to truly bring me solace. Despite the implications of this story, I had a really deep connection with Kyle, and while it's easy to write off as teenage drama, it still scarred me. My family and Charlie have helped me rebuild. Our relationship may have begun unconventionally, and could certainly be classifiable as trashy, but we don't care. We're happy, and I have a girl who's gone above and beyond for me. Not everyone can say that.